This week's Parsha is Mishpatim. Mishpatim they translate as ordinances, laws, mitzvahs, some type of mitzvah, and I want to come back to that. Last week we learned the Aseret HaDibros in Parshas Yisro, and we said the focus that I tried to bring across last week was the Aseret HaDibros is not the Ten Commandments. Whilst we translate it as the Ten Commandments, and an art scroll in this Chumash says the Ten Commandments are laid in this way, it's not a term that we know from Jewish sources. Dibros does not mean commandments. Dibros means statements, words, things. A dever is a word or a thing. It's not a commandment. A mitzvah is a commandment. So we have a parsha called Tzav. Hashem says Tzav, command. Moshe commanded the Jewish people. Straight after we received the Aseret HaDibros, and a few little mitzvahs thrown in at the end about idol worship and making a ramp up the altar that we learned last week, comes this week's Parsha Mishpatim. Mishpatim has got, according to Chinuch, 53 mitzvahs in it. It's the most number of mitzvahs we've encountered so far at all in the Torah. And according to Chinuch's count, it's the fourth highest number of mitzvahs in the Torah. The most is in Kiseitze, which has got 74 mitzvahs. Mishpatim comes in fourth, and then there's a big drop-off after that. There's only about 8 or 9 parshas that have got more than 10 mitzvahs in them. Most of the Torah, we think the Torah is a law book, a mitzvah book. It's not. The mitzvahs are encapsulated within the Torah. The Torah is the blueprint of the world. It says that Hashem looked into the Torah, whatever this means, and created the world. It's the way the structure of the entire world works. So normally what we do is we go through the parsha and then we pick some section or sections and we expand on that a little bit. We're going to do something slightly different. I'm going to go through the parsha in a minute or 2 minutes and then focus on the mitzvahs in the parsha and then focus on specific mitzvahs in the parsha and work on that. So let me just run through very, very quickly what is in the parsha, and I'm just essentially reading what Art Scroll brings in the Stone Chumash. On the left-hand side, they bring little subheadings on each parsha, or each section in the Torah. There's lots and lots of parshas within this parsha, lots of stops, because there's one mitzvah, another mitzvah, another mitzvah. We're talking about 8.6% of the mitzvahs just in this week's parsha alone. So Mishpatim is essentially civil law. Make sure you've got civil law. That's really what it's talking about. And we'll come back to that, because what I want to do is build up the structure of how mitzvahs work. So we've got civil law. Then we talk about a Jewish slave. A Jewish slave is somebody generally who either stole and can't repay back, or somebody who owes money and can't repay back, and they sell themselves into slavery for a fixed period of time for 6 years. And then after 6 years, they go free. If they want to stay on, then they have to have the ear pierced at the door, and it's a whole story. And then it's brought down. Rashi brings there. Why do they pierce the ear? Because their ear heard the Torah at Mount Sinai, and they're rejecting some part of the Torah. And therefore, they need to have a permanent sign on their ear that their ear was pierced. It talks about if a person needs to sell their daughter. A young girl, for whatever financial reasons, needs to sell her so that she can afford to live properly, the family can live properly. A lot of these things obviously do not apply in 2025. Talks about murder and manslaughter. Talks about what happens if a person kills a slave. What about penalties? A whole section on penalties for injuring another person. This is the famous part of the Torah where it says, ayin tachas ayin, shein tachas shein, yad tachas yad, etc. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot, a burn for a burn, a wound for a wound, a bruise for a bruise. Rashi on the spot there, the Gemara brings down very, very straight up and down. It does not mean if X takes out Y's eye, X blinds Y can blind X back. No, it means that the X has to pay a penalty for removing someone's eye. Rashi brings straight away there money. It does not mean that if somebody steals, we chop off their hand, as other religions do. We do not cause physical bodily harm to people except within the confines of a proper Beis Din, where the punishments there can be lashes or death penalties. And that's very restricted, and it's only in a proper Beis Din when we have proper halachic laws. So yeah, that's it mentioned several times in the Torah. This an eye for an eye. Most people look at that and think, oh, yeah, Jewish people, if you hurt somebody, they can hurt you back. It does not mean that at all. It means pure monetary compensation for pain, suffering, loss of earnings, and a various range of things brought out in the Gemaras. If an animal gores a person, or an ox gores a person, or another kind of animal hurts another person, what do we do? What are the circumstances there? If a person digs a pit in the ground and somebody falls in that pit, what are the damages payable for that? An animal damages property. What are the problem issues with that? If somebody steals somebody else's livestock, they have to pay back double. What happens if they steal an ox or a cow or a sheep and they slaughter it and eat it? They have to pay back 4 or 5 times. Special penalty for those specific animals. They say, why do they have to pay back 4 times for a sheep and 5 times for an ox? Because the person was embarrassed carrying a sheep in public when they stole it. So the penalty is less. The Torah considers exactly what goes on in everyone's mind. Because, as I said, it's the blueprint of the world. Hashem looked into the Torah and created the world. Self-defense, payment for theft, damages caused by livestock. What happens if you are borrow vessels or you are guarding somebody else's property? You're driving someone else's car, they lend you their car, or you hire a car from someone and you cause damage. What are the payments involved in that? It talks about seduction. If a man seduces a woman, various different things will happen. What are the punishments? What are the consequences of that? Sensitivity to helpless people, to abandoned people. Make sure that you look after, and the Torah says straight, don't taunt or oppress a stranger. In other words, a convert, or people who are visitors, because we were strangers in the land of Egypt. Even though they eventually treated us badly, we were still there as strangers. We were not there. We were there at Paro's good graces basically let us in there initially anyway. Afterwards, with slavery, was separate, but we need to know that we were there and we need to be good to visitors, to strangers, to other people. Don't cause pain to a widow or an orphan. And it says, if you cause them pain, they'll cry out, and Hashem will surely hear their crying, and his wrath will blaze against us. When you lend money to Jewish people, don't charge interest. Don't chase down the money from a poor person. Watch how you do things. I mean, the whole thing with free loan societies comes from this week's parsha. It's mentioned several times in Torah, but it comes from here. It talks about integrity of the whole judicial process, fair dispensation of justice, Shabbos in terms of Shabbos as we have every week, and Shabbos is in Shemitah, letting the land lie fallow for a year every 7 years. Most incredible miracles. More and more farmers in Israel are keeping Shemitah these days. And every time you hear the miracles where there were, last Shemitah cycle, there were stories of a farm completely surrounded by other farms. And that middle farm was the only one that kept Shemitah. The surrounding ones didn't. And there were massive fires going through. Every farm, we saw photos of all the surrounding farms burnt out, and that middle farm was completely unscathed. The fire department couldn't get to that middle farm because there was fires, but Shemitah protects us. And then the Torah talks about the 3 pilgrim festivals, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, and how we need to bring our produce to Yerushalayim. It doesn't mention Yerushalayim, but we need to bring the produce. Talks about the food that we eat there, and then it brings the pasuk, Lo tevashal gedi b'chalev imo, don't cook a kid in milk of its mother, which is mentioned 3 times in the Torah, as we've discussed before, and please God, we will discuss shortly. And then Hashem promises us swift passage to Eretz Israel, that we'll be able to conquer the land. Essentially, we're leaving Mount Sinai. We're potentially going to leave Mount Sinai. Moshe was going to come down from the mountain after 40 days, and then we've got an 11-day journey to Eretz Israel. We spent 40 years wandering after that for various reasons, which we'll discuss in a few weeks' time, or next few months. And then, as I think we mentioned last week, we spoke about how before the Jewish people received the Torah, they said the famous word Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do, and then we will hear. Na'aseh v'nishma is brought in this week's parsha. When did they say Na'aseh v'nishma is an interesting discussion. Did they actually say it now? Because last week's parsha brings, they said Na'aseh, we will do. This week's parsha brings Na'aseh v'nishma. Was it only after they heard these mitzvahs? That doesn't kind of make sense. And there's a whole discussion in the Rishonim. When was this actually said? We follow the fact, we generally accept that they said this before we received the Torah. In fact, it's brought down that Hashem went to all the nations of the world. And however this works, but it's brought down by Chazal, Hashem went to all the nations and he said to each nation, will you accept my Torah? He went to nation number one, and I'm not quoting it verbatim, just anecdotally, he went to nation number one, and they said to him, well, what's in the Torah? He says, well, do not steal. Said, excuse me, we are highway robbers. Our whole life is based around theft. We can't accept that. So he went to the next nation. What's in the Torah? Don't kill. We're murderers. That's how we live. We're the mafia. And each nation he went to, one after the other, and they all asked him, what's in it? And he said, whatever it was. Generally, the thing that that nation is infamous for is what he told them, and therefore they rejected the Torah. He came to Jewish people, and they said, Hashem said, will you accept my Torah? And they said, Na'aseh v'nishma. We'll accept it, we'll do what you tell us, and then we'll listen what's in it. As we said, I think last week, the Na'aseh v'nishma is in chapter 24, verse 7. 24/7, Torah and mitzvahs we need to follow. That's what, there's a little hint in that. Even though it's not a Jewish source of the paragraphs and the numbering in the Torah, it's still, there's something to it. And there's something amazing that happens to be 24/7. Something, the catchphrase of the 21st century. It then just goes and discusses, the end of the parsha just discusses who went up to Mount Sinai, what happened on Mount Sinai, just a short paragraph. Moshe, Aaron, Nadav and Avihu being Aaron's two elder sons, and the 70 elders went up, they saw Hashem, under his feet they saw what would look like, whatever this means, was we're not allowed to, Hashem has no body, Hashem has no physical features, but we anthropomorphize, and in order to understand that Hashem hears, in order to hear, we need ears. In order to see, we need eyes. In order to reach out, we need a hand. And so therefore, we picture Hashem as having ears, eyes, hands, etc. But we need to know Hashem has nothing physical whatsoever. It's the only way we can understand. We can only understand Hashem of those things that we don't know about Hashem. We can understand what Hashem has not got, not what Hashem has. And we do know that Hashem is completely beyond the physical. But they went up, Moshe went up to the mountain, the others stayed further down. He received the tablets, and the Torah tells us that Moshe went up, a cloud covered the mountain, Hashem's glory was on Mount Sinai. It covered for a 6-day period. Hashem called Moshe on the 7th day. It tells Hashem was like a consuming fire on the mountaintop before the eyes of children of Israel. Moshe went up in the midst of a cloud, ascended the mountain, and he was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. That's the whole parsha, 118 verses, except for the last section in Shvi. The rest of the parsha is pretty much all these 53 different mitzvahs. So what I would like to do is discuss what are mitzvahs, and more, not so much what are mitzvahs, but what are the categories of mitzvahs? How do we break up the mitzvahs? How do we work out what's a mitzvah and what's not a mitzvah, and where do they all fit in? And so we're going to do it in a few different ways, and we're going to repeat a few different things as we go along through these different categories. But essentially, we know, as we discussed last week, that there's 613 mitzvahs in the Torah. Now, how do we know this? Last week we discussed that Reb Sadia Gaon and the Vilna Gaon and others calculate within the Aseret HaDibros, within the 10 statements, I'm not going to use that word commandments, within 10, all 613 mitzvahs are there. So we spoke last week about Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, that Hashem commanded the Torah through Moshe. The word Torah is 611, the numerical value of it, plus 2, the first 2 that Moshe, that all of the Jewish people heard. They were thrown out of their bodies. They couldn't take it anymore. And Hashem, They came to Moshe and said, please, can you be the intermediary? So Hashem gave 611 through Moshe to us, but the first two, every single Jewish neshama, and our souls were all there at Mount Sinai. Every single Jewish neshama, including all those people who converted through the ages. So they say when Hashem went to the nations and he offered them the Torah, not every individual in those nations rejected the Torah. The converts through the ages are those people, those souls that didn't reject the Torah. And they eventually, the neshama comes back to Hashem. That's an explanation of how we get converts through the ages. So 613 mitzvahs, a lovely, cute way of remembering it, that the 613 are in the 10. 6 plus 1 plus 3 is 10. 613 are in the 10. And 1 plus 0, the 10 is 1, which is all comes from Hashem. Cute way of remembering it. It's a nice thing to tell kids on Friday night. The mitzvahs are split up between positive and negative, the do's and the don'ts. We know there are 248 mitzvahs aseh, positive, and we know there are 365 mitzvahs los aseh, negative mitzvahs, prohibitions versus commandments to acquire some form of positive action. Then we have a split between mitzvahs that are between man and man and Hashem, ben Adam lechavero and ben Adam lemakom. So we spoke last week, the Aseret Adibros, the two tablets. The first one, the first 5 is ben Adam lemakom, between man and his creator. And the second 5 is between ben Adam le'adam, between man and man, ben Adam lechavero, and that's all the don't steal, don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't covet, don't bear false witness. Now, the interesting one we'll say, just to repeat, honor your father and your mother in last week's Parsha is on the between man and Hashem. How does that work? Well, Hashem was part of the creation of every single human being. It's a 3-way relationship, mother, father, and Hashem. We then have this week's Parsha we called Mishpatim. I said I'll come back to it. So we have 3 different types of mitzvahs. We have Mishpatim, as we said, we have Chukim, and we have Eidos. Chukim are those mitzvahs which there's no reason that we can understand. Hashem just told us, do it. And we're going to focus a little bit more on those in a moment. Mishpatim are judgments, rational laws, that promote justice between man and man, that basically things that every society needs to keep going. And some of those are those laws that are incumbent on all of mankind, the 7 Noahide laws. A lot of that is around Mishpatim, setting up courts within your cities, within your countries, that you can have a proper legal system. That's part of that. And then Eidos, testimonies, are generally, we look at it as reminders of religious events, historical events, things that happen to us, that we are given a mitzvah to remind us. So we put on tefillin to remind us that Hashem took us out of Egypt. One of the reasons for tefillin. Or we have the Yom Tov of Pesach. Pesach to remind us that Hashem sent us into Egypt, punished the Egyptians with the 10 plagues, and then took us out. We eat matzah and Pesach and maror on Pesach for that. Similarly, Sukkot as well. The mitzvahs of Shabbos. Shabbos is a twofold mitzvah. One is to remember Hashem created the world in 6 days. On the 7th day, he rested from creating. He created a new creation called resting. Not that Hashem laid back on his deck chair with a pina colada and rested, or he slept for 25 hours. Hashem stopped creating new things. That's really what that part of Shabbos is. And the second part is to remember that Hashem gave us the mitzvah of Shabbos when we went out of Egypt. And so that's the 3 sections. Chukim being decrees, Mishpatim being judgments, and Eidos being testimonies. Then we have mitzvahs that are time-bound and mitzvahs that are not time-bound. And generally, the split between who does which mitzvah, generally men are obligated in 613 mitzvahs, women are obligated in all the negatives, and any positive mitzvah that's not time-bound for various different reasons. So a time-bound positive mitzvah, putting on tefillin, wearing tzitzis, various other mitzvahs, shaking lulav, hearing shofar Rosh Hashanah. Now, women over the ages have taken on many of those mitzvahs. Ashkenazi women, if they hear shofar being blown, like we did in COVID, I went around blowing a shofar for people. If it was a woman that I was blowing for, she would say the bracha herself. If she was a Sephardi woman, they wouldn't say the brachas. Sephardi women, for positive time-bound mitzvahs, don't say the brachas. Ashkenazi women do. Similar for Megillah and various other time-bound positive mitzvahs. And non-time-bound mitzvahs apply to everybody at all times. And then we have mitzvahs relating to the land of Israel. Most of the mitzvahs around produce, around farming, apply to the land of Israel. Some of them apply out of Israel, but most of them apply only in Israel. And then there's an extra category of mitzvahs added on by the rabbis over the ages. Now, we look at a Gemara and it says, this is a mitzvah, that's a mitzvah, that's a mitzvah. The rabbis essentially only added 7 mitzvahs. 7 main rabbinic mitzvahs were added to the Midoraisa mitzvahs. Things like lighting Shabbos candles is a rabbinic mitzvah added on. Washing our hands before eating bread. That various different mitzvahs they added on. And there are 620 words in the Aseret Dibros, the rabbis learn out, alluding to the 613 mitzvahs in the Torah and the 7 rabbinic mitzvahs added on. How many mitzvahs can we do in our times? Well, let me say it differently. Firstly, no single person can do 613 mitzvahs. Some mitzvahs apply to Kohanim, some mitzvahs apply to Leviim, some mitzvahs apply to men, some to women. So therefore, not every mitzvah can be done by everybody. Some mitzvahs, as I said, are dependent only on the land of Israel. Some mitzvahs are dependent on us having a halachically Jewish government in Eretz Israel. And so when we add them all up, in our times today, we can probably do somewhere between 70 and 80 mitzvahs at most. Chofetz Chaim's got a small sefer that he wrote on those mitzvahs relevant in our times. I didn't look it up before, but from memory, it's somewhere between 70 and 80 mitzvahs that can be done in total. Now, obviously, none of us can do all 70 or 80 because some apply. A Kohen can only do Birkat Kohanim. A Levi or a Israel can't do Birkat Kohanim, for example. And so the 613 mitzvahs, when done in total by all the Jewish people, each part of the Jewish people that's got their responsibility for their mitzvah, then we do all 613. But also, by learning about the mitzvahs, it's as if we've done them. So we can't bring offerings. We can't bring korbanos. There's no daily korban brought in the morning and the afternoon. In the temple times, they brought a lamb every morning and every afternoon. We can't do that. But by learning about those, by learning the Gemaras, by reading the section in the Torah, it's as if we've brought those offerings and therefore done those mitzvahs. And therefore, a non-Kohen can learn that, and then it's if they've fulfilled the mitzvah. Okay, so just a few more examples of Chukim, Mishpatim, and Eidos, the 3 different parts. I'm going to work the opposite way around. Many of them are in this week's Parsha, and these are not a full list of all of them, obviously, but I'll just run through some of them. So in this week's Parsha, Eidos testimonies, Shabbos and Shemitah, which we mentioned, letting the land lie fallow for a year every 7 years. The festival laws, we mentioned that, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. Bringing the first fruits, Bikurim. It's a mitzvah that for the first fruit that grows on the tree, we bring it. And there was an incredible parade that happened in Eretz Israel when people brought their first fruits to the temple. And as we mentioned, the prohibition against cooking a kid in its mother's milk. Those are all in the 6th Parsha. They're all interesting. That should not be there. That should be in Eidos, in Chukim. It does not belong in Eidos. Mistake on my part. Throughout the rest of the Torah and other examples, Shabbos we mentioned, Tefillim, Pesach, mezuzah, putting a mezuzah on your door. It's a sign of faith and testimony of our Jewish identity, but it reminds us, we had a mezuzah, we had to paint on the doorpost when we left Egypt. The mezuzah reminds us about the mitzvah of mezuzah. It reminds us about Hashem every time we go in and out the house. Interesting enough, most people, when they see a mezuzah on the door, will walk past and touch their hand and kiss it. There's nowhere brought down halacha, you kiss your hand. Brought down, you touch the mezuzah and you ask Hashem to protect you and help you as you come and go in and out. But most people today, I think, do actually kiss the mezuzah. Okay, Mishpatim, this week's parsha. So that's judgments, things that govern ethics, interpersonal relationships, rational laws that most of society would come to in their general laws of the country. So within this week's parsha, some of them we've mentioned: laws of slavery, murder, manslaughter, kidnapping, honoring parents. Now, interestingly, in this week's parsha, it talks about a person who strikes a parent or a person who curses a parent. Last week in the series of Dibros, it spoke out honor parents. This week's parsha gives you specifics, and it's forbidden to injure a parent. It's an interesting shaila whether a doctor is allowed to operate on a parent because they're drawing blood. And therefore, even though they're healing the parent, they might be injuring the parent. And so those type of shaylas need to be asked of very big rabbis. If that doctor happens to be the world expert in that particular surgery and the parent needs the surgery and their child is the only one who can perform it, I would assume most rabbis would say, go for it. Yeah, you're allowed to. But again, yes, it does need a question. Property damages, damage by animals, slaves, etc. He said laws of borrowing and looking after other people's property, laws of lending, interest without loans, as we said. Judges need to be fair and show integrity, not take bribes. That's all in this week's part. In other parts, last week we had do not kill, do not murder, do not steal, do not murder, returning lost objects. There's a mitzvah if you find something to return it. So if you have in mind, oh, I just found an object and I'm doing a mitzvah to return it, that's a mitzvah. Just need to think, oh, Hashem told me to do this. Damages, paying damages. Okay, then the chukim. So in this week's parsha, there's essentially the main chukim. Let me work the other way around. The mitzvah that's known as a chok, the real chok, we call it parshas chukas, is what we call the para aduma, the red heifer. Because even King Solomon said, I don't understand this mitzvah. A person who comes in contact with a human dead body becomes ritually impure. Not dirty, it's just a ritual impurity. That person is not allowed to do various things like go into the Temple Mount and various other things. We in the world today are all considered ritually impure. Whether we've been to a funeral or next to a grave or not, we're still considered, because the rabbis put in place that the world out of Israel is completely ritually impure, because there's graves that we walk over all the time. Simple example, Queen Victoria Market is built on a cemetery. I knew about this many, many years ago. I found out about it. Being a Kohen, it becomes a problem for me to go there. And so everyone joked, laughed about it. It's rubbish, nonsense. And a few years ago, it came out, there's a cemetery under there. There's still many, many bodies because they were trying to redevelop the whole market. Not according to everybody. Okay. Shatnez. Sorry, so the red heifer, we take a red heifer, it has to be completely red, and it's killed, it's burnt to its ashes, mixed with water and hyssop grass, and sprinkled on the person who is impure on the third day and the seventh day, and then they are pure enough to go up to Temple Mount. The problem with going on the Temple Mount today is, because I said we're all ritually impure, we don't know which parts of the Temple Mount exactly we can go on. And that's why there's a whole dispute. Some people go up and others don't. Those that go up only stay in certain areas, but you certainly can't go into the mosque, or it's not a mosque, the Golden Dome, or other areas there. But there are, as far as I know, there's 13 different opinions in the early authorities as to exactly where the temple stood on the Temple Mount. Because the second temple, 2000, just a few decades before the destruction in the year 70 of the Common Era, Herod, who was a slave who became the king of Judea, rebuilt the temple and beautified it and extended the Temple Mount. That part of the Kotel that we go to now, which is on the extreme southern side, yes, is probably Herod's extension, or certainly the end of it is. When you go further across, it's the actual original Temple Mount, certainly from First Temple days. So where the actual temple stood, there's several different opinions, and therefore certainly a chief rabbi's office and many of the major rabbis said, we don't go up on the Temple Mount until we've got a red heifer, until we're told that we're properly ritually pure. But people do go up and they kind of skirt around the edges.
The bigger problem is finding a red heifer.
There's many that have been found. Red doesn't mean Ferrari red. Red means the color of a red cow. So every now and again, there's people who are breeding herds. It's not allowed to have 2 black hairs or 2 white hairs. It's very restricted. It's not allowed to have worked. It's an animal set aside for this specific mitzvah. The complication with it is the person sprinkling, the Kohen who sprinkles it, or anybody who's involved with it, they themselves become ritually impure. So effectively, this impurity is transferred from one to the other. No, they don't get 7 days impurity. It's only 1 day. But that's what King Solomon said. He understands the world fully. He was the most intelligent person that ever lived, and yet he didn't understand exactly how that worked. That's the primordial main chayk of these mitzvahs. Others, shatnez, wearing woolen linen. We don't understand. We can try and figure it out, and many people say it's got to do with Cain and Hevel, Cain and Abel. The offerings that they brought to Hashem, one was wool and the other one brought an animal, and therefore one was an animal with wool and the other brought some plants, and therefore maybe it's got to do with that. But we don't know exactly why we're told to do that. At the end of the day, even though we've got all these categories, Eidos, Mishpatim, and Chukim, every mitzvah is a chayk, because we said to Hashem, we will do and we will listen. And therefore, we just accept that Hashem gave us all these mitzvahs. The other mitzvahs in this week's parsha, the chukim in this week's parsha, are prohibition against sorcery, magic, and those kind of things. What's done today, your local magician is not doing magic. They are doing sleight of hand. They are very skillful what they're doing. They've got props that are made in a specific way that they can hide what they're doing. It's not magic. Magic existed previously. Maybe there may well be certain things that they do, but generally, most authorities say, can a Jewish person be a magician today? Yeah, if they're up front and they say, I'm not doing magic, I'm doing sleight of hand, or I'm quicker than you. Your eyes can't see, I'm distracting you, I'm making you look here while I'm doing something over here. That's what the magic is. It's not magic. Yeah, he made the Empire State disappear through mirrors. It was all smoke and mirrors. Okay, but the others are around kashrus, prohibition against eating meat torn from a living animal. We're not allowed to eat meat from torn from a living animal. Nobody's allowed to do that. That's one of the 7 Noahide laws as well. The dietary laws, we're not allowed. This week's parsha, it brings we're not allowed to eat meat that's from an animal that wasn't slaughtered properly, or an animal that was found in the field dead. We can't eat those. And as we said, meat and milk, don't boil a kid, cook a kid in its mother's milk. That's brought 3 times in the Torah, that specific line. At the end of a section, that line is just thrown in. It seems to come out, in at least one of the places, it just seems to come, so to speak, in baseball terms, out of left field. And the rabbis learn a lot out from that. So we could go through, and I was planning to, but just in the interest of time, I won't do this as well, because it's kind of, we've said most of these things, but within this week's parsha, even though it's called Mishpatim, we can break up the mitzvahs in this week's parshas. All 53 mitzvahs will fit in one of the 3 categories, whilst the parsha is called Mishpatim, and most of the mitzvahs in this parsha are Mishpatim, and they do fit into this rational type laws that we need. Just in terms of headings, we spoke about laws of slavery and servitude, bodily harm, property damage, responsibility for property, social justice, and ethical conduct. And within each of those, there are several mitzvahs. In terms of Eidos, testimonies, there's the laws of Shabbos Shemitah we spoke about, the laws of the festivals, and temple offerings, Bikurim, and bringing firstborn animals. And interestingly enough, in the temple itself, the temple was a chametz-free zone. They did not have, almost, I must say 365 days of the year, there were only a few offerings that had chametz in them. The rest of the offerings were matzah, different forms of matzah, but almost every offering was chametz free. The only couple that had chametz in them. And there's lots of offerings in there, but the chukim in this parsha, which we haven't mentioned, we mentioned sorcery, magic, and there's the mitzvah not to let a sorceress live. If somebody is being a witch, that's where it comes from in this week's parsha. Halachas against bestiality being an extremely severe prohibition. The sexual prohibitions are brought later on in the Torah, but that one is specifically brought here. And offering sacrifices to idols and idol worship again is brought here. But as we said, the three chukim brought in this parsha, eating meat from a living animal, torn from a living animal, kosher dietary laws, not eating treif food, and prohibition against cooking a kid in its mother's milk, meat and milk separation, come into the sixth parsha. So what I thought was, let's look at some things around what is kosher eating. What does it mean? What do we do? What does it mean to be kosher? What does it mean, the food that we eat, that we ingest in our body, what impact does it have on us? And so let's just look at, I ran through and I got a listing of, and it turns out it happens to be, I think, 50 items I managed to pull together of through the Torah and through mostly Torah, but some rabbinic things on what is a kosher diet in terms of what we eat, how we cook it, how we eat it, all the ritual around it and everything else. I want to just go through that, but essentially we can learn out, I guess, three things from the way we eat, whatever we eat. One is being mindful of Hashem, that everything comes from Hashem. So when we eat, if we say a bracha and thank Hashem for the food we've got, we're then elevating that food just within itself. Obviously, on Yom Tov, there's a mitzvah to eat on Yom Tov. There's mitzvahs to eat on Shabbos, to enjoy Shabbos. Oneg Shabbos, the enjoyment of Shabbos, comes with eating and drinking. It comes with not being a glutton and not being overindulging in everything, but we do things in a way that elevates us. Excuse me. Caring for others, hospitality, charity, taking tithes. By taking something off the food we've got, we're a farmer, and taking something off and giving it to others that are less fortunate than us, we're elevating again. We keep lifting that food up. We're taking it from the whole point of kashrus in a way is, let's take a mundane animal-like activity. That's really what it is. Animals eat. The cow sits in the field and it chews the grass. And the lion goes out and it hunts the cow and it eats it. Well, hopefully not a domestic cow, but it eats another animal. And that's just animalistic. If we can take our food and elevate the food that we put into our bodies, then we elevate our neshama. That's what the goal of kashrus is in many ways. And the third thing is really just living a balanced and refined life. Because if we focus on the way we eat, now, that doesn't mean that kosher food is healthy. Because lots of the food that we ate in the Haim was not exactly what we would call in a modern diet healthy. Yeah, correct. Kreplach, kishka. But kishka is beautiful. No, so Shabbos food is different. That gets elevated within itself. But again, not to overindulge. Yes, but if you think about it, all those foods from Europe, from the Haim, ended in the word lach. Means like it's all of us together. We ate together. What do we eat today? Broccoli, zucchini.
Asparagus.
No, but that doesn't fit. No, that's us. No, that doesn't work. Asparagus doesn't work. No. But all these things end with an I. It's all about me. We eat for ourselves. We just sit there. We should be eating. Those foods were encompassing foods that it meant let's eat with others. Let's invite people to our table. That's what it's all about. Eating should not be I don't know, we are stuck on, in our generation, going to the best restaurants and eating the best foods. And when we go to Israel, the discussion is, ice cream aside, I'll come back to it in a moment. When we go to Israel, the discussion is, oh, we're going to go this day to that restaurant and this day to that restaurant. No. Today we're going to go to the Koisel, and tomorrow we're going to visit this rabbi. And we're going to that shul, and we're going. And our focus is completely the wrong way around. Yes, the food in Israel is incredible, and yes, we do need to support Jewish businesses, but that should be the secondary thing, except for ice cream. You've got to go to Israel and eat ice cream every day. There's a reason for it. When you eat only Chalav Israel, you can't get ice cream that's not Chalav Israel, very not much of it here. So when you go to Israel, you've got to make
You've got to pig out.
not pig out, have an ice cream a day, one a day. No.
I've seen some photos.
No. One ice cream a day is the norm. Okay. So thinking about all of that, in a number of different categories, we can look at, I've got here 6 categories of mitzvahs around food. So obviously the first one is kashrus. What's permitted, what's not permitted. So eating only kosher animals that split hooves, chew the cud. Eating only kosher fish, fins and scales. There's a prohibition against eating, there's positives and negatives. So we're only allowed to eat certain animals and we're not allowed to eat other animals. And the Torah goes through all of those. Kosher animals, kosher fish, kosher birds. Prohibition against eating non-kosher insects. The permission to eat kosher grasshoppers. We as Ashkenazim do not have that permission. Well, we do, but we don't have a tradition of which grasshoppers are kosher. But certain Sfardim do. People eat grasshoppers. Okay.
What is the reason about the fish and the scales?
Because that's a choik that Hashem told us that we're not allowed to. So you can read a reason into everything. Essentially, if you look at those sea creatures that are not kosher, the shellfish and the like, they generally happen to be scavengers. Now, this is not a reason, because Hashem said these are what you're allowed to eat. The reason is that Hashem said that the protein that you get from eating regular fish with scales and fins. Now, every fish that has scales has fins. Not every fish that has fins has scales. So shark has scales but not fins. So that's not kosher. The protein you get from eating that, it's still today. I mean, people, dietitians, nutritionists talk about the benefits of eating fish. I don't know. Personally, I just look at people eating things and pulling apart shells and crustaceans from not even a kosher perspective. It just doesn't look like enjoyable eating. It looks like and eating's got to be enjoyable. Not to eat. Make sure that animals are slaughtered properly, and I'll come back to some of these things and some of the reasons and benefits around it.
Just apropos that, if I can ask a question, with the laws today as far as the slaughtering of animals is concerned, and it goes through the health inspector and that, how come a pig wouldn't be passed if it was measled, which was the old story?
No, it wasn't the old story. So the Torah said that you're only allowed to eat animals that chew the cud and have cloven hooves.
And that doesn't.
It has cloven hooves, it doesn't chew the cud. So that's
Okay.
why. There's various other reasons behind it. Yeah, we can look into it and say, no, the Torah has caught up for sure. Within the Torah, there are 4 animals brought. 3 that chew the cud and don't have cloven hooves, and 1 that has cloven hooves and doesn't chew the cud, being the pig.
Okay.
There's no other animal in the world that's ever been found that has one or of the other signs. Many animals have neither, but only those animals that have both are what we're allowed to eat. And so you want to eat a giraffe, you can. It's interesting the way of shechting it. You've got to have a big step ladder. But so those animals you can, because the Torah says you can. There's different laws in terms of how you shecht an antelope versus a cow, versus a chicken. Those birds that we eat, there's only specific birds that we can eat. The Torah, interestingly enough, lists out the types of birds you're not allowed to eat. And it's generally birds of prey, whereas other birds, now there's many signs within the birds that we can tell which is a kosher bird and which is not, but we need to have a tradition as to which birds we can eat. There was a question about turkey being an American bird. And so there were people early on that wouldn't eat turkey because they came to America and they never had turkeys in Europe. So we don't have that tradition. But the rabbis at the time, as far as I know, said, well, it's so close to chicken in terms of its physical structure, the way the turkey is set up, that it is a kosher bird. And so, personally, I don't like turkey, so it doesn't really matter to me. But if I eat it, I'll eat it. But it's not something I would choose to eat, kind of thing. Okay, so where was I?
Sorry.
That's okay. Tray for animals. We use the word treif as a generic phrase for anything that's not kosher. A treifa animal is one that's where it's been found and had died from an injury. So it had a specific injury that it died from, and that's why it's called treif. An animal that wasn't slaughtered properly, so a kosher animal that wasn't slaughtered properly, either because it was shechted but something was wrong, and then it will generally be sold into the non-kosher market. So something was wrong with the slaughter process, not with the animal itself, is called an avela, an animal that. So there's two differences. We just generally use the term treif to describe anything that's not kosher, but it is technically a very specific term. When an animal is slaughtered, they will check the lungs particularly. If there's something wrong with the lungs or other parts of the body, then that animal will be called a treifa. And a treifa animal is generally an animal that's got one of a number of sicknesses or diseases that means the animal, in normal circumstances, would not survive for 12 months. Okay, we're not allowed to eat certain forbidden fats. We're not allowed to eat the gid hanashi, the sciatic nerve, which is why we don't eat the hind quarter. Now, there are butchers in Israel that know how to pull out that nerve and those sinews around it. Mostly out of Israel, even in Israel, mostly we don't eat the hind quarter. It's sold off because it's an extremely expensive process. It's a manual process to take it all out. Correct. And we said prohibition from eating a limb from a living animal. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just things that I've gathered. Okay, mixing foods. So obviously the main mixing that we've spoken about a few times is meat and milk. The Torah says 3 times, and the rabbis learn out why does it say the same word 3 times. Prohibition against cooking meat and milk together, prohibition against eating meat and milk together, and a prohibition against getting benefit from meat and milk cooked together. So if somebody unfortunately cooked meat and milk together, that you couldn't eat it. It wasn't if a little bit of milk drops in a pot of chicken soup, it can be kosher. A person needs to ask a shayla of a rabbi to work out what is or isn't kosher. But if a little bit drops in, or a little bit of meat drops into milk, in many times that food can be kosher. You might need to kosher your dishes, whatever, but that food is fine. You don't need to chuck it out as long as you get the rabbi to work out what it is. However, if it's not kosher, let's just say a bottle of milk dropped in, you thought it was almond milk and it was real milk, and you poured it in by mistake. You're making chicken soup, you want to put almond milk in, and you poured in real milk. Whoops, I've got a problem here. What can you do with that food? Well, you can't give it to another person. You probably can't benefit. That's benefiting your own dog, possibly not. And so you really have to chuck that out because you can't sell it. You can't get any benefit from that. By giving it to a non-Jewish person, you're getting benefit from it. And so it's a forbidden species. We've got a prohibition called kilayim, planting similar crops together next to each other. You can't plant wheat near a grapevine. There's various prohibitions called kilayim. There's various things with to do with kilayim. Shatnez, mixing wool and linen, not with food, with our garments, is a form of kilayim. Pulling a cart with a horse and a donkey is a form of kilayim. It's mixing breeds. Obviously, mixing 2 animal species together is not allowed. And mixing grafting one fruit into another. The classic example they bring is nectarines. There's a machloikas whether nectarines is an actual fruit or whether it's a mixture, I think, of a peach and a plum. There's going way back when. This happened now. I can't create a peach and a plum, put them together and make a nectarine. However, there's no prohibition for eating a nectarine. I can eat that. There's no issue whatsoever. And then that starts going into agricultural mitzvahs. So we can't eat, if we plant a fruit tree, I plant a lemon tree in my backyard. I'm not allowed to eat the fruit for the first 3 years. That's called orla. The 4th year fruit, certainly in Eretz Israel, is called Neteravai, and it's supposed to be taken to the temple. Again, it's got an issue of sanctity. That fruit is sanctified. What do? We in Australia, I got no idea. I go to the fruit shop. I got no idea if the grapes that I'm buying come from a 2-year-old vine or not. That's fine, because it wasn't. Chances are it's not Jewish produced food that a Jewish person has sold, and therefore we accept that it could be acceptable. We spoke about leaving produce for the poor, leket shikha paya, that's leaving the corner of your fruit, or if you dropped a sheaf, you're not allowed to go back and collect it. And just anything that's dropped, you leave it. We learn from the book of Ruth, that she was gleaning in the fields behind Boaz's workers. That's a mitzvah of leket, of picking up what's left over. Separating truma. So we take off the first percentage that given to a kohen. We separate 10% of what's left and give it to a Levi. The Levi takes off 10% of that and gives that to the kohen, called trumas masa. During the 7-year, we spoke about Shemitah, during that 7-year cycle, we take off Maaseh Rishon, another 10%, the next 10%, and that goes to Yerushalayim and it's eaten there. Or we redeem it, we sell it for money, and we take the money to Yerushalayim and buy food in Yerushalayim, which is why Yerushalayim was a center of learning and everything, because people would send their kids there to learn, and the money that they had from their Maaseh Rishon went with the kids to feed the kids while they were there, or themselves. And in the 4th and the 6th year, of that, there's a 3rd and the 6th year of the Shemitah cycle. We have Maaseh Ani. We give 10% to poor people of that produce. It's a whole range of restrictions and mitzvahs and sanctification. Separating, I've gone through all that. Special foods for festivals, eating matzah on the first night, eating challah, eating bread in the sukkah on the first night is the exact same mitzvah as eating matzah on the first night of Pesach. They parallel matzahs. Eating maror, the prohibition of chametz on Pesach. Drinking 4 cups of wine is rabbinic at the Seder. It's introduced based on the Torah, but it's rabbinic. Bringing first fruits we spoke about. Korbanos, eating the korban Pesach, eating other korbanos where we can. Obviously, in our times, we can't eat all of that. And then there's many, many other miscellaneous mitzvahs relating to food, eating or not eating. It's prohibited to eat food or drink on Yom Kippur, for example. There's an interesting prohibition, rabbinic prohibition, that we're not allowed to eat before we daven. We've got to serve Hashem in the morning before we go and daven. The story happened once with us. There was a man who, unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but he had diabetes. We didn't know this. And he came to shul and he had a yard site for a parent. He wanted to lead the services. And he did. And he just struggled to get through. He was a competent person. He could daven properly. And after the rabbi said, he'd left, and the rabbi said, what went wrong today? And everyone had their own reason. The rabbi said, I'll tell you what went wrong. He knew this halacha and he didn't want to eat before he davened, and his blood sugar levels went haywire. So in that case, you do need to have something because you can't, but generally we don't eat. Okay. So what I really want to focus on, we've only got a few minutes. We might run a little bit over if you don't mind. Last week the shiur was shorter, so we'll borrow the time from last week and bring it into this week. How's that? Okay. So what I want to talk about is this chok of eating, this law that we don't understand about kosher foods. So I did a bit of a play around online, and I pulled together a few things. What are the benefits, physical, spiritual, ethical, the advantages of eating kosher food? So spiritually, it's a divine commandment. Hashem told us, we believe in Hashem, therefore Hashem told us, keep kosher. It's a decree from Hashem. It's simple as that. Hashem says, I'm Hashem, you shall sanctify yourselves and be holy. Being holy means elevating ourselves, connecting to Hashem, and we can do this by doing the mundane job of feeding our bodies. We have to eat. No person can survive without eating. And therefore, if we can elevate our eating in a way that we're connecting to Hashem, obviously our soul is then being elevated and connecting to Hashem. Kashrus keeps Jewish people in business, and people complain about the price of kosher food. If you work out how much is involved in slaughtering an animal from a kosher perspective versus a non-kosher, you'll never complain again. Because what is it doing? It's keeping a butcher in business, keeping a slaughterer in business, it's keeping the rabbis that are overseeing it in business, it's keeping the shkiach, it's keeping, it's giving people panosa. It's a mega industry, and to pay a little bit more for meat, we don't need to eat that much meat at the end of the day. To pay a little bit more and realize, this is coming from Hashem. I'm doing something that Hashem told me to do. If you do that, that meat cannot cost you more. It costs you less, guaranteed. I guarantee, we're going to talk about it. Let's talk about Rambam. I have this book called I Guarantee. I want to read what it says on the back cover of I Guarantee. This book is a phenomenal book. It's very, very, very scary. It talks about, the first part of it talks about a story of a woman called Sarah Chama, I think is her name from memory, who was diagnosed in 1979, aged 34 or thereabouts, I think, with very severe lymphatic cancer. It developed from a swelling under a rotten tooth. It grew and grew and grew. In late 70s, it's from 76 to 79 is when this cancer was growing. She was diagnosed in 79, pretty much given no chance of living, and she adopted Rambam's diet. She refused to have chemo in those days. And at the time of the writing of this book, she was very much alive and well. And after she survived her cancer, she even had another child. This book, I don't know when it was written, so I can't see the front page. 2005. In fact, expanded edition 2008. Yeah. Okay, so Rambam guaranteed our health. And so just on the back cover, how could Rambam give such a guarantee? I'll come back and discuss Rambam in a few minutes. The Rambam, Moshe Maimonides, was a great doctor as well as a Torah scholar. He understood that germs and viruses only affect bodies that are unhealthy and cannot fight back. When disease attacks body tissues that are saturated with sugar and other poisons, the results can be fatal. Scientists understand that bacteria, viruses, fungi, and cancer cells multiply in the presence of sugar. The Rambam guarantees that if we follow his teaching and eat only healthy food in the correct quantities, that's our problem in the 21st century, correct quantities. We eat way too much food. That's one of our problems. We will enjoy constant good health throughout our lives with divine assistance and mercy. This inspiring book tells many wonderful stories of people who have transformed their lifestyle, overcome fatal illnesses. By returning to traditional Jewish wisdom, you can benefit from the Rambam's guarantee of health and longevity. We're going to discuss a little bit about the Rambam. But first, let's just go through some more things about kosher eating. So obviously, spiritual benefits, connecting to Hashem. Hashem gave us this as a chok, and therefore we have a spiritual connection to Hashem. It's a self-discipline. Keeping kosher is discipline. You've got to think twice before you eat anything. Before I eat a strawberry, I've got to wash the strawberry properly. Eating the top of a strawberry, you've got to cut the top off, because that's where the bugs probably are. You've got to check vegetables and fruit, because eating a bug, one tiny little ant, is a huge problem. The Gemara in Makkos discusses what's involved with all of that. Okay, the health benefits. Okay, now again, we can eat a 100% kosher diet and be extremely unhealthy. We can change our diet, keep it kosher, and be very healthy. So, shchita, kosher slaughtering, obviously involves a swift cut with an extremely sharp blade, draining the blood completely. There's a reduction in risk of bacterial contamination, because blood is a breeding ground for pathogens. Non-kosher methods like stunning the animal can cause toxins to remain in the body. In fact, it might increase the toxins as the animal goes into that shock. You asked about seafood. Kosher laws prohibit animals that are sick, injured, or have defects, ensuring a healthier food source. Non-kosher seafood like shellfish often carry a higher risk of foodborne illnesses because they are bottom feeders. They feed off the bottom of the ocean, and they absorb toxins from the water that sink down to the bottom. Mixing meat and milk. Meat and dairy may help digestive health, since proteins from meat and from dairies require different enzymes for digestion. So the body works in different ways. There's a halacha brought down in Shulchan Aruch. It says we shouldn't eat meat and fish together. Now, there's no in the Torah that says eat meat and fish, because Shulchan Aruch just says because it's unhealthy, it's dangerous, it actually says, because it is dangerous. I once asked the Shaila, what does it mean by it's dangerous? The answer I was given was meat is a warm protein, fish is a cold protein. Mixing those proteins at the same time, cooking them together or eating them together, the body's digestive system doesn't work as well. That's the answer I was given, and that's what is being brought here. It helps potentially in some people reduce inflammation, acid reflux, different things. If we eat the food that Hashem told us to eat in the manner He told us, without mixing what He told us not to eat, our body will react in a way that it's supposed to react. Rigorous supervision prevents contamination. Okay, now we live in a society in the Western world where we do have very, very strict laws around food preparation. Thankfully, we do that because that helps us significantly. And that helps us in kashrus because modern food production is extremely complicated. In the old days, it was very, very easy to keep kosher because everything was pretty much made in your kitchen and you just did it. Today, food production is such a complicated process. Several years ago, I remember reading the OU, which is the biggest kashrut authority in the world, in America, had over 100,000 derivatives of things that they supervise. Not food things that went into foods, and little, like those things, additives and things that go into food production. It's a huge, huge business. And so therefore, we know that if an organization is government controlled and it's under kashrut authority, there's extra stringencies involved in that production. Therefore, that food has got to be at least healthy. Maybe not. I mean, it might have lots of sugars or anything with an E in front of it. Be careful of. That's my general rule. Now, we eat so much stuff with all these other things in it, but we just need to eat those in moderation. Ethical and moral benefits of kashrus. Obviously, kosher animals, we hear all the time about RSPCA and various others complaining about kashrus and various countries banning shechita and the like. But shechita is designed to be quick, painless, and stress-free on the animals. We've all seen videos of other forms of slaughtering, where TV stations go underground and film various things. A proper shechita is done in the most humane way possible. The knife has to be checked using the shochet's fingernail. Runs his fingernail on the knife, and if you try that, just try it on a piece of paper. You can feel the tiniest little indentation or mark or something wrong. That knife has to be super, super sharp. I'll tell you, super sharp. We bought a new bread knife. Sourdough, which we have here, which is healthier than regular white bread, significantly healthier, it's got a hard crust. And often it's hard to cut the sourdough. We bought a new knife. We used it for the first time on Shabbos. I cut through that sourdough like butter because that knife is so sharp. Now, in 3 or 4 or 6 weeks' time, it probably won't be as easy. Shochet has to sharpen his knife regularly and check it regularly. Ethical consumption means being more mindful of where the food comes from, how it's prepared. That's not necessarily true because it could be produced in just a regular factory that's got supervision, but we do think about what we're buying far more than just your regular Joe on the street who's just buying anything. Keeping kosher makes a person more conscious of what they eat, where the food comes from. We're citing brachas before and afterwards. It just gives us a sense of gratitude, of mindfulness about the food. Mindful eating is something that is phenomenal. Rambam talks about it. It's a modern phenomenon, but Rambam talks about it in detail. Just sitting and chewing your food slowly. Put down your knife and fork before you take your next bite. Don't rush through eating. Those type of things. Just think about, what am I doing? Why am I eating? What do I need to eat for? Because I need to serve Hashem. I need to do what I need to do in the world. I need to go out and do a chesed. Therefore, I need to eat properly. It creates a unique Jewish identity. We've got to keep the kosher restaurants going, which we've been doing for thousands of years. So, and obviously that's the freezer, making ice. When it encourages family togetherness. Friday night meals is something, I think that's what kept South African Jewry certainly together for decades.
Keeps everybody together.
The kashrus laws are focused around eating together. It strengthened Jewish unity because we got standards, and therefore we know everybody knows Coles Elstomik has got all this kosher food, and we go there and you meet so many people. Sometimes better not to go there. Okay. So whilst we've said the primary reason for keeping kosher is following Hashem's will, it's what Hashem wants us. There's health, ethical, cultural benefits. Kashrus encourage mindfulness, discipline, and a connection to Jewish values. And it also ensures that the food that we eat is at least been through some form of supervision. Now, I was going to discuss beyond my brain, but some of the more Kabbalistic understandings around what eating is about. I think in the interest of time, we'll leave that for another time. But just to say that the rabbis say that eating kosher food opens up our neshama and our heart. Eating non-kosher food does something to us. It blocks the heart. It causes some form of a block. When it's using the word heart, it's talking on a spiritual, not physical level. Blocks the neshama. And therefore, we just contemplate what we eat and how we eat it. Okay. Now, I think that was all that I had on that. Okay. I'll just go through the summary of that. Okay, kosher food is a spiritual superpower. Keeping kosher is not just a set of dietary laws, it's a system of spiritual refinement. It elevates the sparks of holiness in the food we eat. We eat a cow or cow meat that has been shechted properly, that blood's been removed. Firstly, the blood is the life source of the animal. Kashrus means we remove the blood. So by eating that, firstly, it elevates that animal. The soul of the animal, the nefesh of the animal is elevated, and our neshama is elevated and connected to Hashem, and keeps us pure, as I said before, from spiritual blockages. There's divine energies in the world, and it balances out these divine energies. It keeps us connected to Hashem's holiness, and it helps bring a full repair to the world. It helps the world be where it needs to be, because if the Jewish people are eating kosher food, we're doing what Hashem wants us to do. And so let's look a little bit about Rambam. We spoke about that book, I Guarantee. I guarantee anybody who wants to read it can borrow it with the greatest of pleasure. I also have a couple of other books here, which if you would like to borrow them with pleasure, this very small book written by Rabbi Ari Enkin, Health and Wellness. He brings two parts to it. The beginning part, he brings lots of statements, importance of guarding one's health, and just brings sources. One line, it's all bullet point, one line after another, different sources of how important it is to guard one's health. Food and mealtime. Just what type of food we should eat. He talks about sleep, and it's not only about food, it's about having a good night's sleep. Exercise. How we use the bathroom. Hygiene, bathing, mental health. I think that was the last section. No? Doctors and medical treatments. All of those he discusses, all in bullet point, just sources for each of these things. And then he brings various articles, most of them written by himself, on different things in connection with eating and healthy living. It's a phenomenal little book, very short, well worth paging through and reading it. And the other one is a book by Rabbi Yecheskel Yishayek, To Your Health. Also, Torah themes on how we should live in the modern world. This was written a few decades ago. 2016, not so long ago actually. But yeah, pomegranate, very healthy food. It says about
show you how to get the pips out.
There's in water. That's a simple way. So interesting enough, we've been speaking about how many mitzvahs there are. It's brought down by Chazal. How many seeds in a pomegranate?
600
13. They're not necessarily 613, but probably on average they are.
Oh,
So
challenge is
I'd
to
like count them.
them.
That's correct. But eating a pomegranate is one of those foods that is special in the land of Israel, and therefore it's beautiful food to eat. Okay, let's talk about Rambam just very briefly. So Rambam, as I said, is Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. He's known as Maimonides, being son of Maimon. His father's name was Maimon. He was born in 1138, died in 1204. He was born in Cordova, which is today's Spain. It was the Muslim part of Spain at the time. The Muslims ruled most of Spain. The Christians then took over and then kicked us out. But his family were expelled when he was quite young still from Spain because they refused to convert to Islam. They landed up going to Morocco and finally Egypt. He was a rabbi. His brother had supported him. His brother was a businessman. His brother had supported Rambam in his learning. Beautiful relationship, and unfortunately his brother passed away quite young. Rambam now had to go out and earn a living, so Rambam became a doctor. He did not go to medical school in Egypt, in Morocco, in Spain, or anywhere else. He learned medicine from the Gemara. There's many stories of rabbis who advise doctors. The Chazon Ish somebody came to see the Chazon Ish. Chazon Ish died in 1953. Somebody came to see the Chazon Ish, was about to have major brain surgery. The Chazon Ish looked at his records and discussed it with him and called the doctor, asked the doctor to come and see him to explain how he was going to do the surgery. And the doctor explained. The Chazon Ish said to him, I don't believe you should do the surgery that way. Rather do X, Y, and Z, whatever it was. This brain surgery in the late 1940s, maybe early 50s. And the doctor said, I've never heard of that before. And he went away and he consulted other specialists around the world. Came back to the Chazon Ish and said, I think we're going to try what you did. That methodology of doing that type of brain surgery is still used today. That's the Chazon Ish who'd never spent 1 minute in a university or in medical school.
Incredible.
And that happens continually. There's talk, we talk about tonsils and removing tonsils. When we were kids, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, you had tonsillitis twice, your tonsils were out. The Gemara says an animal without tonsils is a treifa. And it's brought down. And so this is being learned here in the Kollel in Melbourne. And there was an ENT sitting there and they were learning, somebody was learning with him this Gemara. And he says, that's incredible because today we don't take our tonsils straight away. It's only if they're severely infected. Gemara says you don't just pull things out of the body. They're there for a reason. We might not understand the reason. But it's only if it's obviously, if something is severely impacted, then we need to rely on doctors who know what they are doing. But at the same time, we should always consult great rabbis. These kind of questions need to go to the greatest of the great who are involved in medical things. But they are able to work with doctors and help them, all from Gemara. And this comes out from Rambam. So Rambam became a physician. In fact, he became the physician to the royal family in Egypt. That's how good a doctor he was. But he was a rabbi. But he used to spend most of his time where he could, learning, and a little bit of his time being a doctor. But he was a doctor. And he was also a philosopher. He was criticized a lot during his life and afterwards because a lot of his teachings were based on Greek philosophy and ancient philosophy, not so much on Jewish philosophy. So there is a lot of contradiction. And various rabbis criticized his works severely. And so much so that they wanted to put him in cherem, and various things happened to him over time. But after he died, some of those, at least one of those rabbis that criticized him, went to his grave and asked for forgiveness because they realized how great he was. In hindsight, people realized how great the Rambam actually was. And he says, he guarantees. So I want to run through some of the things that Rambam says. We've got 9 here, and I'm just going to go through the headings briefly, and then I'm just going to do a table of what Rambam's Guide to Healthy Eating is. Okay, so he says, eat in moderation, don't overeat. I mean, all of these things should be natural and understood by all of us, but most of us tend to eat by habit. And I'm just trying to break my habits. And if I can break 1 or 2 of my habits, maybe I can help other people break their habits. That's really what it's about. But this is, I'm talking to myself about breaking my habits. Eat in moderation, avoid overeating. He says most illnesses come from bad eating habits. A person should eat only when hungry and drink only when thirsty. It's Hilchos Deos. It's his halachas of the way of the world. It's halacha that. He says overeating, even kosher food, harms the body. He says the key is portion control. Not eating until full, stopping at about 75% full. This is a Rambam we're talking about from the 1100s. We're not talking about a doctor in 2025. Eat simple, healthy foods. He recommended fresh, natural foods instead of processed, heavy meals. Easy to digest, best foods, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, and lean proteins. Avoid overly fatty, fried, sugary foods because that causes illness. Drink water instead of other drinks. He strongly discourages drinking too much wine or beverages with sugar in them. In those days, they did have sugary beverages. They weren't called Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola, but they had beverages with sugar. Best drink we can have is clean water. Now, they talk about in I Guarantee drinking super filtered water and things like that. May not need to go to that extent. Melbourne water is relatively clean, but be careful where you're going away and drinking water in other places because it's not always so clean. He says drinking before a meal is good, water. Drinking during a meal to excess can affect digestion negatively. Drink during a meal, but rather drink before the meal. Eat at the right time. He emphasizes having a regular eating schedule. Morning, have a light meal, just give you strength. Lunch should be your midday meal, should be your main meal of the day, and dinner, make sure you have a light meal. He says preferably before sunset. And now it's not hard in summer here, easy enough, but have a light meal at night and don't eat late at night because that affects digestion. Chew your food well. Better digestion. Rushing through meals causes stomach problems, weakens the body. Connection between food and spirituality, we touched on that. Eating should not be just for pleasure, but to maintain health and to serve Hashem. A wise person should eat only to stay healthy, not for enjoyment alone. It doesn't say not for enjoyment, not for enjoyment alone. Here's that's quoting that. Kosher food is not about just laws, it's about maintaining a pure body and soul. Avoid harmful foods. He talks about not eating foods, even if technically kosher, we shouldn't eat. For example, too much red meat is too hard to digest. Fried or overly oily foods causes sluggishness in a person. Too much dairy causes mucus. Rotten or spoiled foods poisons the body. He says, listen to your body. If food makes you feel bad, don't eat it, no matter how much you love it. I 25 plus years ago, after Shabbos, in Shabbos afternoon even, I used to have the most terrible reflux and worked out that it was from the challah we were eating. Commercial challah with all the oil affected me terribly. As soon as Tamar started making homemade challah, that reflux went away. I sometimes eat too much challah now, but that's why we have sourdough as well. But yeah. Okay, last two, exercise and digestive health. Rambam stresses good health is not just about eating well, but about movement as well. Daily exercise keeps digestion strong. Daily exercise means standing up, walking. It doesn't mean running around, going to the gym all the time. Everything dependent on your age, your state of fitness, your state of well-being. But, and he said before, avoid eating and sleeping immediately afterwards. So don't, after your Shabbos lunch, go and lie down. Let the food digest. He says a little walking after a meal is recommended. Get up from the table and walk around a little bit. My late grandfather used to stand up after every meal, and you just stand there.
Stand up.
For 10, 15 minutes from memory,
yeah.
but it's his thing. It was his
And
thing.
he was like this.
Yeah. But,
When he's to walk.
okay, the importance of a calm mind, mindfulness while eating. Rambam stresses one should eat in a relaxed manner, not rushed, not angry, just calm down. Stress and anxiety during meals at any time, I'm saying, can weaken digestion and cause health issues. A person, quoting Hilchos Deos again, should always be joyful, avoid anger, and eat with a settled, calm mind. Okay, Rambam's approach is a balance. That is a balance of Torah, wisdom, medical science, guiding us in the way that we keep both our mind and our body healthy. Simple stuff. Okay, let's go through a summary of what Rambam says and see some guidance that he has. Principles: eat in moderation. Guidance: don't overeat. Stop when you're 75% full. Eat natural food. Focus on fresh, whole foods and avoid processed foods. And this is what modern science is telling us. There's nothing, the Rambam said this 1,000 years ago, 900 years ago. There's nothing modern science is not saying we should do here. Drink water. Avoid sugary drinks and too much alcohol. A little bit of alcohol is healthy, but it needs to be just a little bit. Keep a routine. Drink water. Keep a routine. Eat meals at set times and avoid late night eating. Chew well and eat slowly. It helps digestion and prevents illness. Food is for health, not just for pleasure. Eat to serve Hashem, not just for the taste of the food. Avoid unhealthy foods. Even kosher foods can be unhealthy. Exercise and move. Regular movement is the key to digestion, and eat with a calm mind. Avoid stress while eating. If we follow a diet that Hashem told us to do, that Rambam enumerated on and expanded on, and we just keep these 9 simple principles, then please God we'll be able to serve Hashem, and we can say, Na'aseh v'nishma, that we heard what Hashem said, we took on what Hashem said, and we heard what He told us to do. We'll live a long and healthy, fruitful life till 120.
Amen.